Hello, everyone. I'm Emma Knights. I'm Chief Executive here at the National Governance Association. And thank you so much for joining me to listen to the session around increasing participation in governing boards. And I'm hoping, although it will be a bit of a whistle-stop tour, to talk about recruitment, but then also a little bit about involving and retaining volunteers, because really they are two sides to the same coin, aren't they? Some of you may be new to our webinars, so I just thought I would mention that these aren't our interactive sessions. We do lots of other seminars and networks and conferences for our own members, where we do have a lot of interaction and questions. But I'm afraid on this occasion, I'm very much in information mode, and if there are questions that you've got, please do still put them in the chat function, and we'll take them away and reply afterwards. You will be sent the slides, and indeed I think that Molly has already handed them out there. We do record all our webinars because we make them available afterwards, so please do, and those share them with other people. They don't need to be members of NGA, and particularly on this occasion, those who are taking a lead in recruiting and developing boards very, very welcome to watch it at a later occasion. And there's the plug, so that I don't move on to the topic in hand without saying to you, thank you for what you do for pupils and the communities where you govern. It is not said enough by the sector as a whole, so at NGA we like to repeat that at every possible occasion. We absolutely know that we are serving governors and trustees who are volunteers, and we also know that we are producing huge amounts of resources, and some of those take some reading. So we really hope that we're getting astute in working out when an information sheet is more appropriate than a very long piece of guidance, and we're trying to produce the right things at the right time. So please tell us if we're not producing what you need. So today's short session is really to try and produce a digest of everything that we've got, and I will refer time and time again to different resources if you want more information on any of the points. So I'm going to start off by looking at why we do need diverse boards and how to achieve that by recruiting the right. You can see there I put right in inverted commas. It's not a great phrase, but it's one that we started using about 10 years ago, and it's really stuck and taken off, and lots of other people use it as well. So it absolutely doesn't mean that there are wrong people. There are just people who fit the gaps in your team. But we're particularly going to be looking at promoting the vacancies to unrepresented groups. And then lastly, that point about engaging and retaining volunteers. And I didn't target this just at chairs, vice chairs, governance professionals, school leaders, those of you who are more likely to be involved in recruiting and then developing the volunteers. Because in the research that we did, the message came over to us loud and clear that actually this is a team effort. Everybody needs to be involved in welcoming new voices, different voices. And sometimes it was felt that making the case for diverse governing boards was left to one or two people. And that's actually what made it difficult, just taking that decision to go ahead and look at your diversity around your board table and do something about it. So in terms of making that case for diversity. Some of you, I hope, will be aware of our good governance graphic with those 3 pillars: ethical, effective, and accountable governance. But you can see that it's built on the foundation stones of your organizational mission and values, but also board culture, behaviors, and diversity. So that's really the bit of the good governance graphic that we're talking about today. We produced last month, right at the end of June, actually it's only a couple of weeks ago, a very significant report. In fact, I hope you don't find it pretentious. We actually did name it there: Increasing Participation in School and Trust Governance, a State of the Nation report on recruiting and retaining volunteers. We called it a State of the Nation report because although we and other people have been working in this area for years and years, we realized that nobody had actually compiled all the evidence, all the literature in one place for the school sector. So that's what we did in that report. It was both a literature review of what happens in other sectors, what we can learn from looking at other places, but also really looking at what NGAs collected, first through our survey data, but then secondly, through a series of focus groups that we were asked to conduct last summer. At the end of August, we had a diversity and equalities advisory group to say, look, what can we really do to make a difference here? We've all been trying to increase diversity on our boards for a few years now, but what did the numbers tell us in our survey? That we weren't making a big difference. So we needed to find a way of actually making change. And one of the things people who engaged with that piece of work said is, yes, you've got the high level numbers, but you haven't really talked to the volunteers themselves and said, what are the barriers to getting involved? And what are the barriers once you're on the board? It's all very well to have your place around the table, but are you listened to, and do you make a difference? So that middle one is then a summary report, because as I said, it is a state of the nation. It's a long report, and we felt that for a lot of people who are volunteering, your time is precious, and so there's a summary report of the main findings. But an equally important part of this process was there on the right-hand side, that guide to recruiting and retaining volunteers, the right people around the table. That was a new addition. Again, a document that we've produced for many years. This is the 4th edition, and we will be refining again next year. So most of what I say to you will in fact be in that piece of guidance, and that's the bit to make the difference. Because we had an event to launch the publication, which is available to everybody to watch. I think Molly has got a link to YouTube if you did want to listen to what was a very, I thought, dynamic discussion, and there was quite a bit of challenge about that. One of the big challenges was, come on, we've got a lot of reports. Now we need to have action. So that guidance is part of the taking the action. And this webinar is another bit of taking the action. So why haven't we, despite a lot of effort and a lot of talk, really made a difference? I think it's in part because that idea that a diverse board is absolutely essential to good governance isn't as widespread as we would like it to be. But what the report shows, what the literature shows, is that diverse boards do make better decisions, because what you're doing is avoiding groupthink. You're considering all those important decisions from many different perspectives. So you've got to work as a team. You've got to have that common vision, hence that other foundation stone about all being on the same page in terms of your mission and your values. But then you need to bring those different backgrounds and approaches. And then, of course, we need to think about the fact that you're governing schools, which are an incredibly important public service. Indeed, don't you think that sort of COVID over the last 16, 17 months has shown even more how important schools are in terms of that community leadership role? So there's also a point there that there wouldn't be, for example, for Tesco's or somebody else in the private sector. That actually there's a duty really to also try and reflect the community. Because pupils are looking to see role models on their boards, but also it's about understanding the experiences that those pupils themselves have. Almost, for example, 1/3 of our pupils now in schools are from Black, Asian or other ethnic minority backgrounds, and we absolutely don't reflect that currently in the governance community. Another reason is, in fact, having that healthy culture will then set that culture for the whole organization. And we're not here to talk about diversity of leaders or staff, but that modeling diversity is incredibly important. So given that there is this big disconnect between the demography of people governing and the pupil population that you are all serving, and I'm not going to go into the figures today, they're all in those reports that I've referenced. We have said we do need to take concerted action now. And I think everybody in the country really is at the point where we're all really rather exhausted after the 1.5 years we've had. And I think that's absolutely true of schools as much, if not more, than other parts of our country and our public service. So I completely understand that for those of you that are doing the recruitment to boards, you're saying, oh, and here's one more thing that NGA is telling us to do. And indeed, it's not just NGA, it's also very much writ large now in the governance handbook. But my message today is actually lots of you are already thinking about this, and perhaps the fact that you've turned up for this webinar means you are one of the boards, one of the people that's already thinking about how can you address the composition and practices and dynamics of your board. So I think the message from me is this isn't necessarily about doing something extra or something more. It's about doing something different. And this is really almost a reminder to myself about making this case, because many of you will know that NGA, alongside Inspiring Governance, has been running the Everyone on Board campaign to try and increase diversity. In fact, it's just had its third anniversary, and there we were targeting younger governors and also Black, Asian and minority ethnic governors and trustees to make the case for their voices to be heard rather than ours. And as I said, it didn't necessarily move the dial as we hoped that it would. However, the really good news is what our research showed us is those people that were proactive tended to succeed. And I think that's a really, in these times where we need a bit of optimism, that's a really optimistic finding, that sometimes people are a little bit, this is very different. How do we go about this? And it almost means that action isn't taken simply because it feels more complicated and more difficult than it actually is. And I hope that what I'm saying to you today is you don't have to do that much differently, and you may well achieve different results from the ones that you've had before. So this is we've called this our recruitment cycle for many editions of the right people round the table. So if you first evaluate what you need, go through the recruitment and appointment recruitment process. And then that fourth circle just used to say induct, and I've added in after our research welcome and induct, because that came through so clearly from the focus groups that we held. And it was quite surprising that perhaps it wasn't the diversity of experience that people in the working in the focus groups had. So some had absolutely tremendous experiences, both in terms of the recruitment process, but also more importantly in terms of the induction process, in terms of being listened to, in terms of being able to make a difference. And that's what you all want to do. And people aren't going to stick around if they don't think that actually they're making a difference. However, there were other people for whom there was really no welcome and there was really no induction, which I'm sure many of you listening will find quite shocking. So again, what some people are doing, we need to move into standard practice. So let's start with that, evaluating whether you've got all of the right people around the table. What are the gaps that you've got? So one of our 8 elements of effective governance is starting with that. How do you evaluate it? Now, we've rightly been criticised again last August in the group I mentioned. People were saying, why are you calling this a skills audit? There's more that we need. It's not all just about skills. Yes, they're important, but they're not the only part of what we need. So the team at NGA are doing a really thorough update. We update the skills audit every year. It has over 10,000 downloads a year. And we also know from our survey that almost all of you do undertake a skills audit regularly. But this year, we're really looking at it again from first principles, and we're conducting focus groups. So the idea is, with the new version, you'll be able to look at not just some classic skills, such as finance and HR or PR, that list that we're all probably quite familiar with, but also the collective backgrounds and experience of people, the understanding of the communities that you're serving, and the capacity to create and support a truly inclusive culture, and just to make it easier to use and easier to act upon. So you may be saying to me, well, Emma, why on earth are you now doing this webinar here in July rather than waiting to September when you've got a lovely new audit tool to show us? And it was for 2 reasons. One, in a way, is to let you know that was coming. We know many of you do review your skills audit in the autumn. But also it was to say, you can still keep recruiting over the summer. You may not want to do that. You may need a big break, but we do know a lot of you have got very proficient with recruiting virtually, and that can continue over the summer. So some of you may well, lots of other governance activity, I hope, is going to stop now with the school holidays. But if you need to keep recruiting, that doesn't need to stop. So you will find in our guidance large, well, perhaps not that large, helpful advice on how to go about recruiting. And I think this is one of the really important parts, is we all know, or you all know because you do it, just how important a role this is. We talk about doing it professionally, don't we, even though it is a volunteer role. So treat this as though you were recruiting to a paid role, to a job. We've really seen a change over the last 4 or 5 years as we've really been pushing this. And I do remember I was saying this probably about 5 years ago to a local association meeting. And the chair of that meeting did give me a bit of challenge and just said, Emma, do you realise just how hard this is? And now you're telling us to go and interview people when really, if somebody is breathing, I say, come on in and take your seat. And I was so chuffed when 2 years later he offered to write a piece for us, and in fact I think it's still on our website, talking about the changes he made as a result. And he even put in there, at that time I thought that Emma Knights was slightly barking, but I have been converted to doing it in this way, which is really pleasing, because we do know from all our contacts with you, whether that's our survey or conversations on the advice line. Sadly, I don't bump into so many of you at events over a cup of tea anymore, but that sort of day to day, we know that recruiting is not simple. And please don't beat yourself up about that if you have tried and had difficulty. There are 250,000 of you across England, and by definition there will be a churn. So we're always recruiting, there will always be vacancies. And I meant to say this earlier, so I'll say it now instead. The idea of increasing diversity is not to get rid of, I should say, people like me, white people in their 50s. We are very, very typical governors. The average age for those who govern schools and trusts is 55. It's not to say out with you oldies and in with the new. It's to say, actually, we all have vacancies really regularly. At any one point, there's probably a third of you without a vacancy, and of course they will come and go. So this is about when you have vacancies. And I'm not today talking about parent governors or other elected governors, or indeed particularly foundation governors, although you can encourage your diocese also to spread their net wider, and that might be a conversation we can have on another day. But here, when you're looking to appoint candidates, the message from all the literature and the focus groups were cast your net wide, go to as many places as you possibly can, use a recruitment service. So those three that I've got there, Inspiring Governors, Governors for Schools and Academy Ambassadors, they're all free services, and they all concentrate on schools and trusts. You probably know Inspiring Governance and Governors for Schools particularly are recruiting for smaller trusts and for single schools, and Academy Ambassadors particularly recruit for trustees for medium and larger size trusts. But they're absolutely set up to do exactly this, match you with volunteers. In London, for example, there are a lot of volunteers. It's not the same in all parts of the country, but if you have any difficulty, get in personal touch with people and they will seek folk out for you by contacting employers. Use all your local networks. Other community routes you may well be doing, local employers. One that isn't used quite as much is your own alumni, your school alumni. And this, of course, fits with our diversity angle, because they are going to tend to be younger. And actually, it doesn't necessarily matter whether they live absolutely locally now. They know your area, they know your school, they may be working elsewhere. Perhaps they can join meetings virtually. So do think about alumni. We've had lots of examples of people being very successful in recruiting younger members of their board by opening up to alumni, focusing on alumni. So that word focus is really what I'm pushing. Think about who do you need, and do not feel awkward. Do not feel that it's belittling people if you don't have a Black member on your board, particularly if you have a group or percentage of Black students within your school. That's not the only time to do it. But you could be completely positive about saying what we need is a Black a member of our board, and it might be in fact that you couple that with a particular skill. It might be a Black lawyer you're looking for, or a Black accountant, and then use those networks. Lots of employers now have Black networks, the larger employers. So although you might be saying, look, Emma, it's hard enough to find an accountant, let alone a Black accountant, it's about focusing on firms. If you contact an accountancy firm and say you're particularly looking for an early career accountant, and if you make that case for what they will learn from the process, you will find that it's not as difficult as you originally thought. Word of mouth, I think, is a really it's still important. We know it's an important way for recruiting, but it's about doing it in an inclusive way. So it's not just our mates that we're asking onto our governing boards. It's about thinking as broadly as possible and asking them to pass that word of mouth on. So what we're trying to do is avoid cronyism, a word that's in the news quite a lot at the moment. And then remember that if you're going through the process and interviewing, it's not as though you're handing a job to somebody that you found through a network. I realise I'm getting very excited about this first half of the presentation, so I shall speed up a little bit now. I won't say so much about actually conducting the interviews and making the appointments, because that is really well covered in our guidance. And in fact, those of you who are involved in recruiting people in your own places of work, it will all be very, very familiar to you. So instead, I want to talk about that welcome and induction period that turned out to be so important to whether somebody stayed and felt they were making a contribution. So again, we have an information sheet just on induction, and it lays out these 5 steps. So the first thing, I'm sure most of you do this anyway, have an introductory visit and meeting, and often that will include the head, if it's a school, chief executive, if it's a trust. But then there are other absolutely key contacts. So the clerk or governance professional, really important to making sure that new member of the board has the information that they need. But that second one, I really want to emphasize, having a buddy or a mentor. This is now much more common practice than it was several years ago. And it really does make a difference to people. They don't want to necessarily ask the rest of you silly questions. They can ask the buddy and mentor questions, help them orientate themselves, help them understand who different people are and what their role is. So please, if your board doesn't do that, if you could take that idea back with you, that would be great. An information pack, again, we have a lot of ideas about what should be in the information pack, and you can see from our 8 elements cycle there are 2 bits really. I've highlighted the understanding the role and responsibility. That's incredibly important, but the second part is actually equally important, knowing the school and trust itself. So some of that information is about the role. Some of it they should have gleaned during the advertisement and interview process. You will have provided them with a role description, etc. You will have discussed that at the interview, but there's obviously more detailed information that you will be providing at this point. Then actually a bit more formal training. NGA, I'm sure you're aware, produces e-learning. Learning Link can be an important part of that because it's accessible and it can be done from day one. But actually, there also is a need for, I was going to say face-to-face, but at the moment it's often virtual face-to-face, isn't it? But a course that provides something a little different from e-learning. And then number 5 says other support prior to the first meeting, which might be help around if you have an online system for your papers, so that they can really have a read through what's been going on before. But I also felt almost we do need the support for those first 6 months, first couple of terms, and that's where going back to that buddy and mentor can be so incredibly important. but it's also where I want to emphasize those dynamics in that first meeting. It wasn't, sadly, completely unusual for people to say they hadn't been introduced to the rest of the board. Just really, fundamentally basic things as that, explaining to people context, explaining acronyms, etc. Really important. So that's flashed up there because we produce an induction guide, and clearly we think that should be part of the pack that's given out at school. So there's my plug for that. It's cheaper for our standard members and it's free to our gold members. We also have a separate guide for multi-academy trustees, because clearly that is significantly different from governing a single school, and that's currently sold out and being updated for September 2021, well, this September. And I also wanted to flash in front of you the fact that we are now doing a session that we're calling Welcome to Governance Live for the different types of schools and trust, and those are the dates for our October session. So if you are gold members, please make sure that your new governors and trustees sign up. So just a moment or two more. I just wanted to go back around that circle, back up to evaluation. How do you know then that you really have inducted, developed and welcomed somebody well, to the extent that they feel that they can contribute, that they are purposefully governing? And I'm not today on purpose talking about board development, because I thought that really was too much to bite off in this length of presentation. But I wanted to come back to that, thinking about how you hold your meetings. Do you, whether you're the chair or the vice chair, and a big plug here for vice chairs actually, often vice chairs can really take the lead in developing the newer members of the board, because the chair already has really rather a lot to be getting on with. So one of the things that we suggest is there, I've written it down as an annual conversation. Some people do talk about it more formally as appraisal or performance managers of management of governors and trustees, but I like to think of it as an annual conversation between the chair or the vice chair and each governor. But then it's particularly useful for those new governors to really listen to what they're saying as to how they found the board, and how they feel that their skills and their experiences are being used. Because one of the very clear findings from our research was that sometimes people felt they were coming into a board that already knew what it was doing. It had a very set culture, and this is the way we do things around here. When actually the whole point of having the diversity is that you listen to the new ideas. You don't always have to take them on board, but you're giving them a really good airing. It's not that newer governor that you brought on because you've recognized that they help fill a gap, but once they start questioning, you go, oh, no, that's not, wouldn't be appropriate here. So those conversations, ongoing ones with the buddy and mentor, but the much more formal taking stock ones, really important to listen. I wanted to give a plug for the governance professional. Some of you may know we're doing a lot of work on governance professionals, and by that we mean the person that is paid to administer and provide you with advice. Often for a single school will be called a clerk, but they will be able to help on this, particularly if there's someone who's worked in a lot of other settings or possibly still do. Think about that self-evaluation that you're doing. The chair themselves may want to, or maybe should, undergo a 360 review. You may want to talk to other boards informally, absolutely. Go and observe another board meeting, or do a more formal peer review. Or an external review of governance is now very much being recommended by the Department for Education. The latest Academy Trust Handbook is really emphasising that. And you would expect those sorts of reviews to now look at the dynamics, to observe a meeting and see how that worked between all of you. And then my last plug really is for an exit interview. Again, this isn't necessarily very common practice yet, but it's practice that we've been encouraging. When somebody does leave, and that might be at the end of the whole 4-year term, or it might be before that, please will someone conduct an exit interview and find out why it is that person has had to leave. Now, actually, it could be for a very good reason. We have discovered that younger people do often move jobs more, move homes more, start families more, and therefore they may not be able to give that long-term commitment. However, we've had chairs saying, yes, our young governors only lasted, say, 2 years on our board, but boy, were they useful and influential while they were with us. So for my very last summary, I'm trying to bring it back to the simple sounds a little bit patronizing, but actually this isn't as different getting yourself a diverse board as you perhaps think it is. It's much more about a mindset change. It's much more about you all sitting down and going, actually, we are going to do this. We really are going to look about what's missing from our board. It may be visible in terms of ethnicity. It may take a little bit more discussion and digging deeper into people's experience and background. And when you do have that vacancy, just don't revert to type, as it were. Think about all the different routes that you could use, and proactively target groups, and don't be embarrassed about that. You can, shout your ambition to diversify your governing board, and you can point to NGA's research and say, we're doing this because it's better governance, because it will help us make better decisions. Interview, have that two-way discussion. They'll be checking you out just as you're checking them out. Provide that mentor and buddy, and please do plan induction seriously and use our guide. So thank you so much for being with me today. I'm sure you will have thoughts, and some of that we will pick up through the chat, but if there's other things you think about, please let us know. That's the way that we improve what we produce for you. And because this is something that we're very much on a mission about at the moment, we are determined to do better and to sort of change that dial in terms of diversity on boards. I'd be really, really interested to hear how you get on. And that might be things that worked, and we would love to share practice. And it might be things that didn't work, and say, look, Emma, you said this, I tried that, and it really wasn't very good because of X and Y. So thank you again for what you do, and I do hope that you are able to enjoy the summer. In my part of the world, we've had a huge amount of rain in the last few weeks, but I've got a very, very sunny prospect right now, and I hope you do too. Thank you.